Buffalo Bills sent Stefon Diggs to the Houston Texans. They have a bunch of money on the books. They're attaching picks to it as well. What does it mean for Buffalo? Was it a good trade? Is Houston on the rise? How does it impact the draft? And what does it all mean for the New York Football Giants? Hey, let's have a conversation coming up next. Yes, sir. OGP, the One Giant Podcast. You know it, that we are Adam Marmot over here, Andrew Makowitz over there, the healthy, the wealthy, and wise. We like to think that we are. And on a day when later this afternoon, you'll see our regular episode come out where we're talking about Rome Odunze and how talented he is, what all the metrics tell you, why the Giants should be elated to be able to steal him at the 6th overall pick. Other wide receiver news breaks as the Buffalo Bills finally, what felt like was maybe, Andy, put a little Band-Aid over it, an extension 18 months ago. Instead, it turns around, feels like Stefon Diggs sent all the messages to Buffalo that he did not want to be there, goes to the Houston Texans for a second-round pick. But there's more than that, as there's big money on the cap sheet for the Buffalo Bills, as well as multiple picks going back to Houston in the process.
Yeah, Adam, this was maybe it shouldn't have come as a shock in terms of Stefon Diggs wanting out. We've heard for almost 12 to 18 months since he signed the extension, basically, that he was disgruntled, unhappy, wasn't getting along with Josh Allen, was cryptic in his messaging, and his play dropped off in October. But when we talk about the actual deal itself, let's go into that first. You mentioned that the framework is essentially the Buffalo Bills trading Stefon Diggs for a second round pick. The Buffalo Bills are also giving a 2025 fifth round pick and a sixth round pick along with Stefon Diggs to get that second round pick. Adam, this is shocking to me in terms of the compensation that went through this, not only because it was a second round pick for Stefon Diggs, it's also a 2025 second round pick, which I think a lot of people are missing. It is not a second round pick coming up in this draft, which you feel like, give me the picks now. I want the picks now and know what the draft slot is, the draft status, get my players immediately. I don't know if I'm going to be around or what's going to materialize next season. To me, this is unbelievable that this is the compensation that was traded. What is your initial reaction to that?
Well, then, I mean, you go back to when the initial negotiations were going on and there was speculation maybe the Buffalo Bills would trade Diggs. And if you think about it now, dial it back to when those first, kind of rumors were starting up, they probably should have pulled the trigger then, right? You probably should have moved him at that point when you felt like the value was high, when other teams were maybe going to be interested in him. Now, nothing materialized that warranted or that got the Bills interested enough to do it. Now, though, I think half the reason that you see this happen is because Buffalo has been having a hard time getting over the hump. You mentioned Diggs. Maybe the numbers aren't quite the same. He's not going to want to be here going forward. So Buffalo is in a little bit of a retool now. And if you look at the age of Diggs, where he is as a wide receiver, if even though you just gave him the money, and we're going to talk about the massive amount of money that they'll still be paying him, I think if you don't pull the trigger now, then you're gonna ride it out. Then you're going to live with those results and you're going to find yourself still paying a player and then maybe dealing with the worst of all scenarios. Stefon Diggs isn't going to show up. Okay, it's going to cost them money, but that also still ends up hurting you on the field because Josh Allen has one less receiver, and we already know Gabe Davis out the door this offseason as well.
It's unbelievable. You mentioned Gabe Davis. Like, they let him walk out the door. Obviously, they thought he was more of a compliment to Stefon Diggs, was not imperative to be able to keep around at the $13 to $15 million range that he was projected to get. Obviously, went to Jacksonville as a result. Adam, it is just shocking when we talk about the financials of what this means. Like, we talked about the trade compensation. Obviously, Diggs at his peak, Stefon Diggs is a wide receiver number one. He's getting a little bit older in age, obviously, right? This is his age 31 season that's upcoming. Usually you don't see elite wide receivers kind of, continue to grow into their 30s. So that's understandable. But Rich Cimini wrote on X that the Bills were desperate to get off Diggs off the team, and it's costing them more in cap space to not have him on the team, $31.1 million in dead cap, than it is to keep him on the team, $27.9 million cap hit, which is a record amount of dead cap for a non-quarterback. So not only did they do this deal and pay Stefon Diggs an extra $20 million for 2022 and 2023, they also are assuming more dead cap in a year where they have Josh Allen in his prime in order to jettison away Stefon Diggs for the largest cap hit non-quarterback related. To me, this is an incredible situation financially for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, so you could argue, right? Hey, you want the extra three something in million in cap space? Go ahead and let him be on the books. Doesn't want to show up, doesn't want to play. Fine. The value of getting that 2025 second round pick, right? And there's the other things we always talk about: locker room, right? You want to have guys that want to be there, and you need your number one wide receiver to be somebody that's plugged in and helping that wide receiver core get better. So there's all those elements of it. Dead cap money, as we know, like that's a little fungible. You can manipulate that. It doesn't always hurt you going forward. No, but again, the question I think it extends to off of this when it comes to Buffalo is what is the direction that they're going to head here, right? So I want to get to that in a second, but let's just briefly go on the other side of this. You mentioned 31 years old, wide receiver, has had what, 6 out of the last 7 seasons over 1,000 yards receiving. He's going to Houston. Why? Because Houston has their franchise quarterback. Because he burst onto the scene last year, took this team on a run, and all of a sudden Houston gets to look at it and say, hey, we're ready to throw some money at this stuff. We have our franchise quarterback on a rookie deal. And this isn't even really throwing so much money as it is throwing a little bit of assets. Let's go ahead and try to bolster our team here. I think this is a great short-term buy for the Houston Texans to make themselves among coming out of their division. Yeah. Getting back to the playoffs again. Yeah. Like you want to keep those good vibes rolling. So this just seemed like a really opportunistic move by the Houston Texans, something that they've been doing this offseason all along.
Yeah, and not only did they get better, but they also made a team that they're competing with in the AFC worse with
Sure.
this deal. Like, the Bills are considered one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the AFC. Houston clearly is on the up and up right now. And when you look at Houston, the deal makes all sense in the world. You mentioned it. When you have a QB on a rookie deal, you go all in, you push all your chips in as soon as you can because you only have this QB on the rookie deal for what, 3.5 years, maybe 4 years if you're lucky before the extension comes. But Adam, for the Texans, how does this sound? I'm just going to go through their weapons on offense.
Yeah.
You have
Lay it out.
CJ Stroud at quarterback, who looked awesome last year in his rookie season. You have Joe Mixon at running back, Stefon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell, and Dalton Schultz at the tight end position. To me, that is a formidable offensive
Yes.
group. And you make this deal because you also now have a veteran leader in Stefon Diggs. You hope his play can continue to where he was in the 28, 29, 30-year-old seasons. And hopefully the regression that you saw in the second half of the year was more related to the dysfunction that was going on between Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen rather than his age and his athleticism and everything else catching up to him.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Houston was a 4 seed a year ago in the AFC, right? So obviously a 10-7 year. They want to go ahead and get right back 10 plus wins. Let's be right back in the playoff picture. Let's be winning this division. I'll give one little caveat here. You can't label Stefon Diggs as wanting to have a leader because there's just nothing about him that suggests that he's been that guy. And I'm not even knocking him. It's just, hey, you're an elite wide receiver. You've been a great talent. You ran out of energy of wanting to be in Buffalo. All good. And I think he'll be absolutely reinvigorated going and playing with CJ Stroud and saying, hey, I now have a year 2 rising quarterback talent that he may, I'm sure. I guarantee you 1000%. You'll hear Diggs in training camp talking about what a perfect ball that Stroud throws him, right? How it's so great to be playing with another elite guy. I'll be curious because there had been times when it was speculated what was the relationship between Allen and Diggs. You always get a little bit of this stuff, right? Friendly fire. We've seen this already this offseason when it comes to Saquon Barkley and parting ways with the New York Football Giants. So new player, new team, fun to watch Houston Texans. Obviously, they're going to be exciting this upcoming season. Now, from a Buffalo Bills perspective, you mentioned one, it's a 2025 second round pick. You can make a case that as Houston continues to get better, that pick may get worse, right? So you want that sooner or later if you're the Buffalo Bills. In the short term, though, at the 28th overall pick in the draft, I have to assume that Buffalo is looking at Josh Allen, looking at the wide receiver room, and saying we need to dial this up. Whether or not they can stand pat and get a player like Mitchell, whether or not Leggett is going to rise into that first round type of territory, or is it a Brian Thomas Jr.? That's going to be like top 20-ish, right? Do they use that extra second round pick in 2025 and try to get the max value out of it now and go move up the board and make sure they target a wide receiver? Because I cannot see Buffalo coming out of this draft and out of this first round, frankly, and not putting another weapon right in that room for Josh Allen.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like T. Higgins would be in the cards for them. Why would the Bengals trade him over to Buffalo? Buffalo can't really
Why would Buffalo then take on more money for T.
right,
Higgins already
right.
paying money? Yeah,
Buffalo doesn't have the money to pay T. Higgins the $25 million a year that he wants. Brandon Ayuk out in San Francisco doesn't make much sense for them either for the exact same reason. So, Adam, your point is well taken in terms of they can't go into the season with Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel as their top two wide receivers. If you're in Josh Allen's prime and you're trying to win now,
of
you
course.
have to find a way to get another weapon. Maybe they look and they say, between Brian Thomas, Xavier Legette, Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, they think they can get a guy that it costs a fraction of what Stefon Diggs did, at a reasonable price and have him under team control next to Josh Allen. I think they're
Sure.
realizing you can't pay Josh Allen $50 million a year and pay Stefon Diggs $25 to $30 million a year. It just doesn't work. The money doesn't make sense. So I'm with you on all of that. I think this I have a larger question about the
Okay,
Buffalo
hold on.
Bills.
Okay, before you do that, let me just offer this because I said before we got on and already over on YouTube, Darren hit this one on the head for me. This is what I wanted to surprise you with was okay. They need wide receiver. Now you're gonna ask the bigger question, but let's assume that Buffalo wants to stay competitive. They want to go ahead and retool. They want to make it so that Josh Allen has weapons available to him. Connection, obviously, between Joe Shane and the Buffalo front office. Darius Slayton, to me, would be a very interesting player to call Buffalo about on draft day. If the Giants need to make a move up the board, need extra draft capital, maybe they go, as we've talked about, you'll hear this afternoon, getting Roma Dunze, right? Whatever wide receiver falls at 6 and making that decision for a number 1. While we like the production from Darius Slayton, when you have Wan'Dale Robinson, when you have second-year wide receiver in Jalen Hyatt, and maybe you add another wide receiver in this draft, not to mention you have Bryce Ford Wheaton coming back off of injury. He's a guy that we want to see out there on the field. What does it take? What does Buffalo slide across the table to Joe Shane and the New York Football Giants to say, we would love to have a $7-ish million option for a player that's been pretty consistent and pretty productive? He's no Stefon Diggs, but we can put him on the outside. And we know when we look at New York, questionable offensive line play, disastrous offensive line play, questionable QB play. Yet here's a guy that gives you 750 yards a season and has been pretty productive and seems to have put some of those drops in his rearview mirror.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no getting around the fact that Darius Slayton's contract is an asset to the Giants. I firmly believe that. The question
100%.
is, if the Giants are looking for a wide receiver at 6, and you turn around and you say, what is the draft compensation that you would let go of a cost-controlled, productive wide receiver? It's a difficult one. I don't know, Adam. For me, I think it probably is around a 4th round pick for Darius Slayton seems like a fairly reasonable trade. You'd want a little bit more, but what does a 700-yard receiver get you? I don't know, a
Sure.
4th round pick to be able to make that swap and the Giants get more ammunition to fill out, whether it's the offensive line or other places. Maybe they go in and draft a tight end in the 4th round. Maybe they could reallocate those resources accordingly. I think a 4th round pick for someone like Darius Slayton between the Bills and the Giants actually would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, is that worth it for the New York Football Giants, right? What does a 4th round pick in this year's draft translate into? Is it a future 4th? Or you look inside the draft, you see Buffalo's at 61, the Giants are at 70. I'm not telling you try to get the Darius Slayton at 70 to move to 61 necessarily, but a package there within, if there's a player that the Giants want to go target. We talked about cornerback being a need for this team. If you get the number 1 wide receiver, if you look there when you get into the 2nd round and you address another area of need that isn't cornerback or vice versa, right? Just a player that you want to target, bolstering this team, an offensive lineman that maybe is sliding a little bit there as you work your way through that 2nd round. I think things like this are fascinating to me. And when you see teams open up a need at a position and also teams that have a bunch of dead money on their books, trying to find some, value buys and value for the Giants is an interesting way to take it. That being the case, let's turn our attention over to a little bit more of an extreme perspective. Andy, if you're a fan of the show, you may notice that Andy doesn't mind a tinfoil hat. He finds it snug and cozy. And you believe that maybe this Stefon Diggs move could be indicative of something larger.
Well, it's not that I believe that it's
You believe it
likely.
wholeheartedly? It's not that
I
this
think
is
that
your
it's
strongest
likely.
conviction ever.
It's not that I think it's likely, but it certainly is on the board of the realm of possibilities
Yeah.
that there is something bigger happening in Buffalo because it's not just about Stefon Diggs. While you can say, well, they're taking on more dead cap to get rid of Stefon Diggs. He must have demanded a trade out. Josh Allen was like, get this headache out of here. Get whatever compensation you can. I'll deal with a young rookie wide receiver. Sure, that in a vacuum wouldn't signify anything. But Adam, they also let Gabe Davis go because they were
Yep.
in such cap hell, frankly, who was a productive wide receiver number 2 for them and got $13-14 million from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Clearly, other teams wanted him in demand. You look at Jordan Poyer. You look at Micah Hyde. They're no longer there. You look at Tre'Davious White. He got released. You
Yep.
look at AJ Epinesa. He's gone now too from the Buffalo Bills. They're turning over 60% of their starting roster essentially in all of the things that they're doing, and a lot of it is because of Josh Allen's contract structure. When you pay a quarterback $50 million and you have all these aging veterans and you restructure and move things down, at some point you got to pay the piper. Now, it may be crazy. They would easily take another $50 million in dead cap this season if the Buffalo Bills were to trade Josh Allen.
Yeah.
But
Just add it
if you're
on.
gonna
Let's get
if
into
you're
that
gonna
Broncos territory, right? Well, Broncos kind of territory of dead money for
Oh yeah,
Buffalo.
between the two of them, Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs, you basically would be at what Russ was told to go away from Denver.
Yeah.
But I mean, think of it like this, and I'm going to ask you if this is even in the realm of possibilities, and you'll probably laugh at me. But I mean, the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, and they're pushing all their chips in. They're going all in.
Sure.
The Miami Dolphins were a playoff team a year ago. You assume that they're going to be still pretty good. Where are the Buffalo Bills in this pecking order if they're getting rid of all of these resources around Josh Allen? You're thinking maybe the Patriots are drafting the quarterback of their future, whether it's Jaden Daniels or Drake May. Maybe they're starting to become on the up and coming. Like, the needle is pointing down for the Buffalo Bills. And if you're Brandon Beane of the Bills, are you entertaining a full rebuild and saying, I'll take as much dead cap as I can this year? What is Josh Allen worth on the open market?
No, I mean, I'll start in division, and I'm not saying it's totally insane. I think the dead money is a massive part of it, but the reason being, it's like, you mentioned the standings there. It's already been speculated for the Miami Dolphins that this is a bit of like a transition year for them. Yes, they had a really great season a year ago. They win 11 games, but they have a lot of money tied up into a lot of players. They have to give the extension to Tua, so all of those factors made it so that they're not going to make as many big splashes as maybe they would want to. So if you look inside the division, listen, you can tell me Aaron Rodgers is coming back and they have weapons on that team and they're going to try to continue to fix the offensive line and they're going to be right in the mix. Okay, great. New England's not going to be competitive this upcoming season. If you're Buffalo, even right now, assuming that you go and you get another weapon here to replace Stefon Diggs, you look at the standings, you go, we're right back in the same position. We're there. We're the favorites to win the division. I mean, pecking order there with the Dolphins, but you feel pretty darn good about getting yourself in the door. When you look around the rest of the AFC and you think about wild card spots, if you're not taking the division, yeah, it does get a little bit funkier, right? Cleveland, in spite of not having elite QB play for much of their season, still got to 11 wins. Pittsburgh now with Russ, right? So I think if you look around the AFC, you could paint a picture where the writing is a little bit on the wall as for where Buffalo could be a couple years from now versus where they are right now. But I think you would hold off. You're going to hold off as long as you can because we're seeing it around the league. When you don't have a franchise quarterback, you might as well not even bother playing the season. When you do, you hold on like grim death and you do everything possible to try to retool, make adjustments on the fly, and keep yourself competitive. And that's probably half the reason why they were willing to get a second round pick next year to get Stefon Diggs out the door and try to figure some other things out right now.
Okay, so I agree
But
with
now
you.
slide me the offer.
Okay. Yeah. Seriously, listen.
Yeah.
You said all that, and it sounds good, great, and grand. You're Brandon Beane. You're the GM of the Buffalo Bills, right? Let's play character.
Okay.
I give you a call, and you say hello, and I say hi. This is Ryan Poles. I am the general manager of the Chicago Bears. And you say, hi, Ryan. Good to speak with you. What's going on? And I say, listen, I've got an offer that you can't refuse. I will give you the number 1 overall pick and the number 9 overall pick for Josh Allen. What do you say as Brandon Beane to get the number 1 overall pick and the number 9 pick for Josh Allen?
Well, what I probably would say is, if I'm Ryan Poles, I would say, a couple days ago, I'd say, April Fools, I'm not giving you the first overall pick and the 9th overall pick. I'm about to get my franchise quarterback with a rookie scale contract. There's no reason for me to make this deal. If I was Buffalo in that spot, I think you'd have to heavily consider that, because you could be talking about, we always highlight Rome Odunze. I could say I get Josh Allen, and then I go ahead and I also give myself 2 more elite weapons, all that good stuff, right? Give myself Caleb Williams, and then I get a Odunze, and I have my tandem, right? Yeah, of course. Like, you can paint that picture. But in most of these scenarios, by the way, even the extreme version of it, like I just said, why would Chicago make that deal? Take on big money when they have their rookie scale franchise quarterback they think right there waiting for them, plus another pick to make a move. It is interesting that you at least slid an offer across the table, where if I was Buffalo, I go, oh, well, that's fascinating. I could actually reset everything right now and solve a lot of my problems. The big issue here, you will have to acknowledge, though, is the dead cap money that you would have while making a move like this for Buffalo would be oddly constrictive to the success story of having a rookie scale quarterback, right? So that's where Buffalo is in a hard spot, just from the standpoint of they are going to be a little bit hamstrung here in the next couple of seasons, and they're going to have to get creative about how to keep things competitive. By the way, you can come back in on it. But by the way, remember, this is also a team that was in a bit of turmoil from a head coaching standpoint. Like, there's a lot going on around this franchise where, at a minimum, it's worth mentioning it now, because a year from now, it may not seem so crazy to have these type of discussions about this team.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reason why I did that is because people may say all the top 5 to 7 quarterbacks in the league are untouchable. I
Sure.
don't know. If you're Brandon Beane and you could reset the clock with Caleb Williams and get a wide receiver number 1 and be like, hey, I got potential job security for the next 5 years. That sounds good. If you're Ryan Poles, you may say, I don't know. Do I want the unknown commodity, or do I want a potential all pro and Josh Allen, even pay him the money? We've
Of
already
course.
got, the wide receivers ready to go. We'd be ready made to compete with Detroit in the division. But if you're the Giants with the 6th pick and you called Brandon Beane, and yes, I know the money, you got to figure out what to do with Daniel Jones. There's a
My
lot
God.
of things you'd have to figure out in this scenario. But when you're talking about the Giants specifically, what if the Giants said, we'll give you this year's number 6 pick, next year's number 1, first whatever overall pick, first round pick, and a second round pick. So we're going to give you 2 first round picks and a second round pick. Are you interested in that deal?
Yeah, see, this is where, so I'll go the other way. As the Giants, I would say, well, what does this totally solve for us? You get the quarterback, obviously, and you know that Brian Dable has incredible familiarity with him, as does Joe Shane, right? So you say, okay, we know the guy, we know the system. He's at his best when Brian Dable was there running their offense. But then you turn right back around probably and you say, now we still need to figure out getting the weapons in the door here for Josh Allen. Like, you're still in a similar spot from a franchise perspective on needing to add all the other things. Now it's a franchise quarterback. And if we're going to talk from a timeline standpoint, the Giants a win now mode team if they made a move like this? And do they have enough left to then still be competitive, to still go get the other pieces that they need, right? Is it as simple as saying, and then we grab ourselves Leggett, we make a little margin move into the first round and get a Mitchell, we find a way to get Brian Thomas Jr.? Like, if that's the picture you want to paint, hey, is that enough, right? And then we roll forward and the defense is pretty good and some other things to address. The one thing I will acknowledge in any of this stuff is, I am always a believer in known commodities over unknown commodities. And right now, whatever we think all these quarterbacks can be coming into this draft class, we said this before, for everyone that hits, somebody misses. It just happened a year ago with Carolina and Houston in the first and second overall picks. So that's where I think it does become at least interesting to have these types of discussions. But again, overall, I don't think the Buffalo's in these waters, but I like the idea. I like
But
the idea of Andy dancing around the NFL and finding GMs to be willing to make these kind of phone calls.
I mean, think about it, Adam. If you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, yes, they got Saquon Barkley. They still don't have a secondary. Like, who's playing safety or
Sure.
cornerback for them? And after they started 10-1, they were one of the worst teams in the league. And then they got run out of the building by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the playoffs and Baker Mayfield. Like, to me, it looks like the Eagles are on a slight downswing right now until they can figure the rest of this out.
Oh, sure.
You look at Dallas. What has Dallas done this offseason? What has been their noteworthy move that they've done? I would argue that they've done literally nothing. They let Tony Pollard go, and they have not gotten better. Nothing about Dallas screams that they're getting better. You look at Washington. Washington is about to draft their rookie QB and trying to retool and figure out what the future looks like. If the Giants were ever going to make a play,
Sure.
and they were ever going to go for a known commodity that has had success with the head coach and in his offense before, you would make a move for Josh Allen, and you would do it now. So, like, when you talk about timing, I think the timing would be ripe to say, we think we could compete in the division with Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns rushing the quarterback, with Dexter Lawrence up the middle. Our defense is solid. Imagine if our offense was putting up 25 points instead of 19 points a game. What
Sure.
would this team look like? Food for thought, something that Buffalo is probably not considering because of the dead cap hit, but it does impact the Giants. You cannot deny that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have these connections with the Bills and Brandon Mead.
No, of course not. 28 years old, Josh Allen, just from a contract standpoint, if you wanted to say designated a post June 1, there you go. That's how you get a little more interesting here. 28, 29 million in dead cap over the next 2 seasons to do it, 25 after. Getting to his year 31 season, you're talking about 16 million. And they start to open up, 14, 38, $40 million in cap room. If Buffalo was deciding to say, hey, this has all been a big mistake and we need to retool. You know what the biggest pushback, and by the way, I was being tongue in cheek with Andy. It's just good. It's fun to explore these kind of narratives. But if the Stefon Diggs situation ended up being the catalyst for the Buffalo Bills blowing it up, that would be even more embarrassing than having given Stefon Diggs the extension, right? You'd be like, well, we made such a mess of the Stefon Diggs thing. I guess we should just trade Josh Allen and move on, right? Like it would be disastrous of that proportion. And again, as I mentioned, they're 28 years old. Listen, Josh Allen is not Patrick Mahomes, but he is of a caliber of QB play that you keep trying to find a way to get better and improve. And we've seen how Kansas City has managed to do that. Buffalo has struggled to hit those points when it comes to adjusting on the fly and making sure you keep yourself high level competitive.
The only other thing I was going to say about the NFL as a whole is, the Giants think it's a problem when we find out that we whiff on players. Evan Neal doesn't work out. Joshua Zudu doesn't work out. Marcus McCathan doesn't work out, whatever it may be. Across the offensive line that hasn't been successful. In addition to that, people obviously are very critical of the Daniel Jones contract. Regret that it ever happened. It's on Joe Shane because he basically co-signed Daniel Jones sticking around. When you look at what happened in Denver and basically the Broncos taking an $80 million dead cap hit to just get Russell Wilson out of the building, you look at what the Buffalo Bills are doing by taking more dead cap on to get Stefon Diggs out of the building. It is not just a New York Giants problem with like, oh, do we like these contracts? Was it a big mistake? There are big swings and whiffs all over the NFL. And so I don't necessarily put it on Joe Shane in terms of like, he's the only one doing this. I mean, think about it. We're talking about big time, all pro level players at some point between Russell Wilson and Stefon Diggs. And they're trying to dig out of it because they're creating their own cap hell. It's fascinating to me that it's not just a Giants related thing.
Well, let's talk about it at the highest level, though, right? Because I agree with you. And I think the big one, obviously, as we know with the Giants, is that it wasn't your pick, right? And you have the 6th overall QB and Daniel Jones, whether or not anyone feels like he should have been drafted there. Okay, he was still in house. You chose to give him the extension, right? So it's an active decision. But let's go right back. I mentioned Josh Allen. He's no Patrick Mahomes. Buffalo Bills are no Kansas City Chiefs. Tyreek Hill, the money, the contract. You would hate to lose a player like this. Actually, you know what? We're going to be okay. Why? Because we have the franchise guy. We have the quarterback that's going to go down in history as one of the best, maybe the best when it's all said and done. We can go ahead and figure this out. In a lot of ways, you mentioned a team like Denver. That's a panic move, right? Going and getting Russell Wilson as you watch him maybe start to show the little inklings of a decline, big money. Then you bring in Sean Payton. You start to turn this thing over and you go, the heck with it. We'll take all the dead money in the world. We're going to recalibrate this thing. They're in a funky spot. They may try to move up to get their quarterback. Buffalo, same thing, right? Teams, well-run teams, find ways to adjust and recalibrate on the fly. And while you talk about what's going to happen in Philly with their secondary, at a minimum, we feel like they do an excellent job year over year of shuffling money, shifting contracts, and always finding a way, at least in the offseason, to approach the draft and approach that next year with everyone saying, hey, Philly's got a really good chance to compete for the division, to go to the playoffs, and to maybe make some noise, right? The Giants have not been in those waters. So I agree with you that it's not just the Giants, right? A lot of teams make these mistakes. The other side of it is good teams don't make these mistakes. Bad teams make these mistakes, right? Desperate teams make these mistakes. And I think the Giants got backed into the corner with the playoff run, and we know that, winning a game against the Vikings, etc. They weren't desperate so much as caught in between. And sometimes you have to just be willing to make that really, really hard choice, which for Big Blue would have been, we're not giving you the money. Go to the market. We'll see what happens. And who knows? Maybe we would have been drafting a quarterback a year sooner. Maybe we would have been talking about, should the Giants try to move up and attack one of the top 2 quarterbacks a year ago, and one of them obviously being the Houston Texans' number 1 man in CJ Stroud.
Yeah, and one of the comments that came in from someone,
FKYO. We'll go ahead. We'll spell that out. We won't create
forget
that
your feelings, basically, Adam. Right?
Yeah.
Josh Allen is on the decline. He had 2 good seasons, and that's it. We're not a QB away. We still don't know about the offensive line. So, a couple things here. One, obviously, look at the Houston Texans. I don't think they were a quarterback away until they got CJ Stroud, and then they ended up being pretty good. And we didn't know about their offensive line. We thought it was relatively bad. They looked pretty good. You mentioned Josh Allen is on the decline. Yes, his QBR dipped a little bit from his 2022 season. Adam, his QBR last year was third in the NFL,
Yeah.
and it was better than his 2021 season. So
Yep.
for me, I still look at Josh Allen as being in his prime. Whether or
Of course
not
he is.
you want to squabble and say he's fourth or fifth in QBR or second
Of
or
course.
first, to me, he's still a top 5 quarterback. You should always be on the lookout and seeing what the compensation would be to get a top 5 quarterback. This is not a Russell Wilson situation where like
No.
the tea leaves
Yes.
have
Yeah.
been, the writing has been on the wall. Where Seattle just wanted to move on from him, they would not let him throw the ball. Like there was a whole host of issues in Seattle. I don't see the same thing for Josh Allen. And to me, Josh Allen has 4 to 5, 6 more at least
He's
pinnacle
28 years
prime.
old. He's
Right, he's
28
like
years
in
old
his
in
pinnacle of his
today's
career.
NFL. Yeah, you're talking about a guy he can play until he start, whenever that decline starts to happen. But another 7 seasons before you're talking about his true decline. Really, what Josh Allen needs, not that that's what this episode is about. What Josh Allen needs is just somebody. Maybe it is Brian Dable back, right? That's what he needs, a Brian Dable on that offensive staff to go ahead and just rein him in a little bit. All it is about some of that little decision making in those key moments where he wants to be a little bit more hero, a little bit more Brett Favre, and a little less patience. We actually, when we did episodes a year ago in the playoffs this past season, you talked about Patrick Mahomes, and every time we were picking games, I wanted to have a little bit of fun. I wanted to get sexy with it. And, you rightfully so kept coming back to, I'm never going to bet against the best quarterback on the field. And the best quarterback on the field every week is Patrick Mahomes. And week after week in the playoffs, Patrick Mahomes, in a team that was not an electric offensive unit in their wide receiving core, he kept being willing to be patient more often than not and allow the team to play itself back into games, allow the defense to pick them up. So that balance that you need to have as a QB is something Josh Allen just has to tweak a little bit. But those numbers, we did this last season too. Josh Allen's numbers, everyone's like, oh, he's falling off. No, go check the numbers, right? And maybe go check if you had an elite number 1 wide receiver that truly wanted to be invested in your organization rather than maybe already having one foot out the door.
At the end of the day, Adam, I
Oh,
think there's
talk to me.
a couple of noteworthy pieces to this. One is that, yes, Josh Allen is not going to be available to the Giants. To me, it's
Yes.
the fact that if the Giants decide to go quarterback in the first round with the 6th pick, there's going to be one less wide receiver in the second round for them to choose from because the Buffalo Bills are absolutely going to be
Yes.
taking Brian Thomas or Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Worthy. So you better understand exactly who you want in the wide receiver group. To me, that's very important. The other piece of it is, yes, Buffalo still needs complementary wide receivers. Do the Giants, if they go wide receiver at 6, now have a way to be able to get value out of Darius Slayton and
Yep.
reallocate those resources somewhere else? Knowing the familiarity they have with the Buffalo Bills, these are things that Joe Schoen is already working the phone, probably already knew this deal was potentially gonna happen from his buddy Brandon Beane. If you don't think the Giants at least knew what the draft compensation was going down there, you would be rudely mistaken. But it's important whether the Giants go QB or wide receiver. This type of move has an impact and ramifications across the first 3 or 4 picks for the Giants.
Yeah, you talk about, again, back into the first round. That's where Mitchell sits at 29, up the board there, obviously at 19 right now on Tankathon, Brian Thomas Jr. But right in there at the top of the second round. Yes, the Giants are at 47 and the Bills are at 61, but 36 overall, Keon Coleman, whether or not you think that's the player for the Giants. Xavier Worthy at 37, right? McConkey, who we talked about too, he's up there at 34. And you don't have to go too much further down before you start talking about Troy Franklin at 41. There's so many names, and then Leggett there at 46. Yeah, they're all right there. But now all of a sudden at 28, if the Bills like a wide receiver and they take him, that's one off the board. Who's the next team that wants to get their guy? And if you're the Giants, obviously a worthwhile cost to go get Brian Burns for that one of your second round picks there to Carolina. But it means you have one less asset to get yourself off the board. And that's where I think we're really touching on this Darius Slayton component. Potentially, if the Giants get the wide receiver at 6, does become fascinating because it gives them some flexibility. And they could maybe put it this way, if you can turn Darius Slayton and his $7 million contract into Leggett at near the top of the second round through pick swaps, etc., maybe all of a sudden you have another rookie scale wide receiver there ready to contribute for your offensive unit. If you've been somebody who's over on YouTube or X following along with us here, we greatly appreciate everybody in on the chat as well. A couple extra comments that were in there. Nick, also BJ Reddy, he's a frequent flyer with us. We will go ahead and touch on this again more tomorrow. But later this afternoon, because we're just flying by the seat of our pants here, getting everybody out and up to date. Mentioned at the top, Rome Odunze. All of the reasons why him falling to 6 would be awesome, why it would be a talent falling to the Giants at that point, and why you can put him right up toe-to-toe with a player like Marvin Harrison Jr. and feel like you are getting just as an elite of a talent. We break that down 2:30 this afternoon right on YouTube, so be sure to check that out. Give us a follow on YouTube, turn on the alerts, get us on the podcast feed, over on X at AndyMac214, at Adam Armbrecht, and at One Giant Podcast. Until next time, friends, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.